Last summer, we took a 3,000-kilometer road trip from Ottawa to St. John's, Newfoundland. Of course, such a big trip calls for a lot of camera gear. So here are the cameras I took for this trip. My main film camera was Pentax 645N with 45 to 85 millimeter lens and the 80 to 160 millimeter, and also the 400 millimeter with 1.4 times teleconverter. I also took my Leica M240 with an adapter to use my Pentax lenses if needed, and also the Fuji Instax Mini 70 as a fun camera. Choice of film wasn't that easy, but I ended up taking Fuji 400 Pro H, Ektachrome, Lomo 800, Portra 400, and Ektar. For the first part of the trip, we drove non-stop from Ottawa to Quebec City, and in Quebec, I put my Fuji 400 Pro H to use. Fuji Pro looks really good, and I really like how it rendered these images. I took this same photo with my instax camera, and while instax quality is way below a serious camera, I think it looks really cool. We spent the night at Quebec City and the next morning drove to Fredericton in the province of New Brunswick. It was our first time at Fredericton, which was quite nice, and I took a couple of photos here and there, but the most photographic site for me was this famous lighthouse. I took a couple of different shots from the lighthouse, including this very cool instax photo. We spent the night in Fredericton and the next morning drove towards Sydney in Nova Scotia. The Big Fidel is the famous landmark of Sydney, and I took a few shots, and again I think my instax shot is not bad. I took a few more images on Fuji Pro and finished my roll. We spent the night in Sydney and the next morning took the ferry to Newfoundland. I loaded my Pentax with Ektachrome and took a few shots on the ferry. And again a couple of instax shots. We spent more than 6 hours on the ferry, and finally we reached Port aux Basques, which is a small port town in Newfoundland. Port aux Basques is small but very beautiful and has a lot of potential for photography. I really love this photo, and I think the combination of light and Ektachrome colors makes it the real deal. I loved it so much that I printed this crop of image for myself as one of my best shots of the trip. We continued wandering in Port aux Basques before losing light, and I took more shots on Ektachrome. One of my favorite photos of the trip is this church in Port aux Basques, and I like both my Pentax and instax versions of it. Our hotel window had a nice view of town, so I took these two shots on Ektachrome, and I think they both turned out fine. Next day we drove to Cape Ray, which is another lighthouse near Port aux Basques. I quickly took one photo of the lighthouse with Ektachrome and another one with instax. I still had Ektachrome in my Pentax, and when I used it with my 400mm f5.6 lens plus the 1.4 teleconverter, it resulted in some very blurry shots. I got really mad at myself for wasting Ektachrome, but I quickly pulled out my Leica M240, and with the 400mm on it, I took these couple of shots that are not bad. I finished my Ektachrome and switched to Lomo 800, and used the first 5 frames of the roll to take a panorama of this beautiful view. After Cape Ray, we drove to Springdale, where we had a really nice hotel, so we spent the night relaxing, and I only have 2 instax shots from the hotel. Finally, the next morning we drove from Springdale towards St. John's. One of the most famous landmarks in St. John's is the Signal Hill, where the first transatlantic wireless transmission was received more than 120 years ago. I still had Lomo 800 in my camera and used it to take a photo of this cute lighthouse. I think the Lomo colors worked very nice for this shot, and I prefer it to my other Lomo shots. And of course, I used my 400mm lens plus teleconverter to take a photo of Cape Fear Lighthouse, which is officially the most eastern point of Canada. I took these shots on film, but it was so far that I changed to digital and used my Leica M240 to take this shot. I took this shot because what we had in front of us was the Atlantic Ocean, and I wanted something to keep this memory. But my best shot on this roll was this one, which was also my last shot on Lomo 800. After Lomo, I switched to Portra 400 and took my first photo of the roll from these colorful buildings. I took more shots with Portra 400, and here is my last Instax photo of the trip. I really like Portra 400 colors, and I totally understand why it is one of the most popular film stocks. I like this photo a lot, and I think the colors and warm tones are lovely. I focused on the rope, which is very sharp, and then gradually falls out of focus on the boat. This photo is also good, but not as nice as the former shot. Nighttime at St. John's, I took my Pentax with Portra 400 in it, which was not a good idea, especially with the f4.5 lens. But I still managed to take this shot handheld at 1/8 of a second and this one at 1/4 of a second. After that, I switched to digital and put the 45 to 85mm lens on Leica M240. Sure, it was still a slow lens, but I could increase my ISO now. You can see how different the image is when shot on digital compared to film. Of course, you can edit the digital photo and make it look like Portra, but the whole point of film is not to need to do that. I took more photos with the Leica Pentax combo. It was really bright for midnight, and I managed to take several shots of the colorful buildings and storefronts in St. John's. It was also relatively crowded and very much alive, which is really cool for midnight. We stayed out until very late and enjoyed the wonderful atmosphere of St. John's. The next day, I still had the Portra roll in my camera, but I only took 2 more shots, because we mostly tried to keep it chill and enjoy our remaining time in St. John's. The second day was our last day in St. John's, and we drove back to Port aux Basques, where I finished my Portra roll with this panorama. After Portra, I switched to Hector, which was a wrong decision because we were losing light. But I took a similar panorama with Hector, and I don't know about you, but I think Hector colors are very nice. I did the same crop for Hector, and I printed both images as a souvenir of our trip. After that, I put on my 400mm lens to grab some closer shots of this panorama, but the images turned out to be shaky. I took a final walk in Port aux Basques and took some photos of the colorful harborfront. The next day we were on the ferry and ready to say goodbye, but I still had 4 more hectare shots on my roll and I managed to finish it on the boat. This is my last shot of this trip and of course I had to print it. And after this final shot, we finally said goodbye to Newfoundland. So that's it. I hope you liked this video. If yes, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram.